Suppose I just bought a brand new car last weekend, and this week I got a big unexpected raise at the office. Now I'm beginning to regret having bought that car, because there was another car on the car lot that I really wanted, that I almost bought, but that I didn't think I could quite afford. Now with the big raise I could have afforded that car, so I'm going to try to re-optimize. I come to you and I tell you, look, I've got this brand new car, I'd like to sell it, I'll give it to you for 3 to 5% off the price that I paid for it. Now it turns out you've been looking at exactly the same car at the dealership, and you've been getting ready to buy that car at the dealership price. Now you have a chance to buy essentially the same car at 3 to 5% less. So initially that seems like a pretty good deal, until you start worrying. You worry, why is it that this guy's trying to sell a car that he bought just 3 days ago? Did he discover something about that car that he didn't like? Is there a defect in the car that they discovered that I'm not immediately able to notice? In other words, you begin to worry about asymmetric information. You worry about me having information about the car that you don't have, and me trying to take advantage of that. So you come back to me and you say, well, 3 to 5% is not enough. I need at least 10% discount off the dealership price. But I'm not willing to sell at 10% less than what I paid for the car, and so I reject your offer. You go to the dealership and you pay full price, and I get stuck with the car. We've just given up an opportunity to make a trade that would have made both of us better off. And it turns out that you and I are not that unusual. People who own used cars that are really good tend to not be willing to sell at the discounts that are demanded by skeptical consumers who think there might be something wrong with those cars. As a result, the used cars that end up making it onto the used car market tend to be cars that have some problems, and as a result they sell at a steep discount. That's why the value of a car drops by about 15% when you drive it off of a new car dealership. Why is it that suddenly, within the span of 15 minutes, you'd lose 15% of the value of a new car? It seems crazy. It's the same car. But the reason is that the people who tend to want to sell a car soon after they bought it are the people who probably discovered something about the car that they didn't like. A defect, something else that they didn't like. It's probably not usually people who just happen to get a big raise and want to re-optimize. So the skepticism on the part of the potential buyers is warranted. And as a result, we see the big discount immediately as you drive the car off the new dealership lot. This is an example of what we call adverse selection. So let me define it. Adverse selection happens when either high cost demanders or low quality suppliers adversely select into markets with asymmetric information. So now, example of the used car market. It's low quality used cars that are adversely selected into the used car market. Where there's asymmetric information, the buyers don't know as much about the cars as the sellers. There are other cases, other kinds of markets where suppliers have more information than demanders. Think about labor markets. The suppliers in labor markets are workers. Workers have more information about their circumstances than the potential employers do. They know why they are trying to leave a job and find a new job. They know how committed they might be to the job if they get it, how likely they are to show up on time, and so forth. So there's more information on the part of the worker who applies for a job than on the part of the potential employer. Or think of a CEO of a company who owns stock in that company. The CEO knows more about that company than potential investors outside of the company. So if that CEO tries to sell some of that stock, an investor might be skeptical and think, did that CEO just learn information about the company that is going to adversely affect the price of that stock? So here the CEO knows more about the true value of the stock than the potential investors. So asymmetric information can show up in all sorts of markets, and it's not just when suppliers know more than demanders. Sometimes it's demanders who know more than suppliers. And the biggest example of that is insurance markets. In insurance markets, the person who applies for insurance, the demander of the insurance, knows more about their circumstances than the insurance company does, who is supplying the policy. Let me take an extreme example of unemployment insurance. So unemployment insurance is typically provided by governments. It's typically not provided in private markets. And it turns out there's a good reason for that. Now suppose that the government weren't providing unemployment insurance and private insurance companies were trying to offer that insurance. They would face a pool of potential applicants for insurance that vary in the degree of risk that they have of losing their jobs. So we could line up employees from low-risk employees to high-risk employees. I'm a tenured professor. It's very hard for me to lose my job. I'm very low risk from the perspective of an insurance company that's trying to sell me unemployment insurance. But there are other jobs that vary greatly with the business cycle, where jobs come and go, that vary with the fortunes of the companies that employ the workers. So there are jobs that are at much higher risk of being eliminated and of workers losing those jobs. Now, if the insurance company initially looks at all workers and says, well, suppose I get a random selection of people buying unemployment insurance from me, they'll be able to calculate what price they would have to charge for the premiums for that insurance in order to make at least zero profit. But then they're going to think about, are these low-risk people really going to buy that insurance? Is the tenured professor really going to buy unemployment insurance at the price that I have to sell it at? And the answer is that a lot of these low-risk employees aren't going to buy the insurance, and so they drop out of the pool of potential applicants. So now I have to recalculate what the premium is that I have to charge, given that I have a pool of higher risk employees than I initially started with. So I'm going to have to raise that premium in order to make at least zero profit. But as I raise that premium, there'll be some more relatively low risk employees in the remaining insurance pool who are going to say, well, that's not worth it to us, so they're going to drop out. But that makes the whole pool riskier. And so the insurance company is going to have to raise its premium to make at least zero profit. As it raises its premium, there'll be another segment of relatively low risk employees in the remaining pool who are going to drop out and say, well, that's not worth it for me. And you can begin to see where that story might head. The entire market for unemployment insurance might unravel as a result of the adverse selection into the insurance pool of only high-risk workers and the adverse selection out of the pool of only low-risk workers. So entire markets might disappear because of adverse selection in the presence of asymmetric information. In the case of the used car that I wasn't able to sell to you, you and I gave up the opportunity to make some surplus. There was some deadweight loss there. That deadweight loss gets really big when entire markets disappear. So adverse selection can cause small deadweight losses. If it's a small issue, it can cause entire markets to disappear, in which case it creates much bigger deadweight losses.